Good morning. Today is the 6th of Tishrei, the 21st of September. And I would like to look at the fifth reading of Ha'azinu today. And at the very end of the fifth reading, meaning we're talking about Deuteronomy 32, verse 39, we have one of the most interesting verses in the entire Bible, because it has a very special phenomenon that doesn't, from what I remember, I don't think it ever happens again, that we have 4 instances of the word I, ani in Hebrew, in the same verse. So I'll read it in Hebrew, because in the end this is poetry and it's a song, so the cadence and the rhythm are all very much part of the experience. So I'll just read it once in Hebrew and then I'll try to translate it. Re'u ata ki ani hu ve'ein Elohim imadi ani amit ve'achayeh machatzti ve'ani erpa ve'ein miyadi matzil. Okay, so what it means is, see now, it is I that is, and there is no deity with me, meaning nobody on par with me. I kill and bring to life, I crush and heal, and no one can deliver from my hand. So, if we weren't talking about God, as we'll see in a moment, this could easily be the motto of the IRS. You can't get away. As they like to say, there's only 2 things that are certain, death and taxes. And we'll see in a moment that this is very much the same idea, but let's look at it. There's a lot of ways to interpret this verse in interesting ways. There's a whole issue here of the parallel between the 2 parts of the verse. We said, really, you have to look at the structure of the word I in it. So he says, it is I. Or just in Hebrew, you just say, ani. I am it. Or here we translated who as I. It is I that is. I am it. And what is this it? Why does he have to say it twice? Because at the end of the verse, the second part of the verse, it's I do 2 things. Here we said I kill, really, I put to death and bring to life. I crush and heal. So each one of the I's is like talking about one of these pairs of terms. Put to death and bring to life. Crush and heal. Now, the word crush here is one possible translation. Actually, we'll see as we go on that a better translation is actually that I separate. I separate and I connect. That's really what it's saying. Again, this is poetry, so you have to be a little flexible with the meaning of the words. Ani machatzti ve'erpa means I separate and I bring back together. To heal is to bring things back together. So what is this all talking about? What are these 2 I's in the beginning? And how are they related to these 2 actions, these 2 pairs of actions, putting to death and bringing to life, and crushing or separating and healing or bringing together? The key to understanding this in our generation is to do something that in the inner dimension of Torah we do quite a lot, which is to count. You remember Sesame Street. So there's the count, and he likes to count. The sages say that the early scholars of Torah, in the latter part of the Second Temple period, were called counters, or sofrim. Sofrim literally means someone who writes or someone who counts. And they say that they had both names. Why did they have both names? I don't know if you've ever seen how a modern scribe writes a Torah scroll. You could probably find it on YouTube. Today the method is very simple. You have a sheet that is the size of the parchment that you're writing on. It's a sheet that usually has 3 columns. And this sheet is placed underneath the parchment that you're going to write on, so that if you could see through the parchment, you would see the letters and you would know exactly what to copy on top of the parchment. So think about it. It's like if it was transparent, then you would just have your sheet with the writing with what needs to go on the parchment underneath. And if the parchment was transparent, you would just look straight through it and just copy and just write the letters one by one. Since the parchment is not exactly transparent, it's pretty opaque, but it's not completely opaque. It's not as opaque as you might think. So what they do is they have a light table. So you have a light table that gives off very strong fluorescent light. And because of that, you can see the letters through the parchment. Meaning you can see the piece of paper underneath through the parchment, and that's how they work. They do this because it's easy to skip a letter. If you would be copying from another book, or just copying from the sheet, and the sheet was to the side, you could very easily skip letters. In fact, thanks to the modern computers that we have, a Torah scroll is not considered to be kosher and valid for reading in public until it goes through a computerized scan. And this is how we rule today. In fact, if you don't do this, then if the Torah scroll was never scanned, it is guaranteed 100% to be missing letters. There's almost no question. Even with all the modern techniques that we use, it has to go through a scan, and you find that there are always letters that were skipped, even with this technique that you put the picture of what the parchment is supposed to look like underneath the parchment and use a light table. It's very easy to skip letters. The ancient technique was, since they didn't have computerized scanning and they didn't even have a way of showing themselves, they were copying from a book, but they had no way to put the book underneath, meaning they were copying from another parchment, they couldn't put it underneath the parchment they were writing on. So the ancient scribes knew exactly how many letters in every single verse. That's how they functioned. So if I would tell them, well, they didn't know Deuteronomy 32:39, that wouldn't tell them anything, but I would tell them the verse that starts, Le'u ki ata anihu. So they right away would tell me there's 67 letters in that verse. And they would have to know that there's 67 letters because they had no other way to quickly know whether they had copied it right or not, correctly or not. At some point, you figure out that that's the easiest way. We call it parity in modern communications theory, information theory. You just count how many letters are there supposed to be. Now, it could be that when you copied them, you copied the wrong one still, and you still got 67 letters, and you made a whole mess. That could still be, but this is the simplest check that you can do. So they knew that there are 67 letters in this verse. It also stands to reason that they knew how many words are in this verse, and that's 18. And the reason this is so important is because 18 is the value of, 18, and 67 is the value of the month of Elul. And if you remember, 18th of Elul was the birthday of both the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidus. Why is this important? Because Kabbalistically, the 18th of Elul, if you remember, the world began to be created on the 25th of Elul, because Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei, is the 6th day. So we go back 5 days, we come to the 25th of Elul. One of the great revelations of Kabbalah was that before the situation or the creation of the world, the way that we understand it, which we call the world of rectification, there was a world of chaos. That world of chaos had, in a sense, 7 days to it. And those were the 7 kings of the world of chaos. There are the 7 kings of Edom that we read about, which are really 8 kings, but we're not going to get into that. And so if you go all the way back, then you find that the 18th day of Elul, if you subtract 7 from 25, you come to the 18th. And the 18th of Elul is the day on which the world of chaos began to be created. Now, what does that mean? It means that Chassidut, the Hasidic movement, is particularly interested in rectifying the state of the world of chaos, which shattered and broke. Why did it shatter and broke? This is why Chassidut is so interested in this, because of the feeling of the ego. The 7 kings who ruled and died, who were not able to sustain their kingdoms, they lost them, they died because of their ego. And by their ego we mean 2 things. One, they weren't married. To be married is to sacrifice your ego, basically. It's really probably the only way you can that a man can rectify his ego. And the other part was that they were not able to cooperate. There was no way for them to work together. So they each stood separately. So it says in the Torah in chapter 36 in Genesis, he ruled and he died. He ruled and he died. He ruled and he died. So the Hasidic movement, whose 2 great giants, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder, and the 3rd generation, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, focus on rectifying the I, the ego. Ego literally means in Greek, I. There are 2 things that the ego does. It kills and it separates. What does it mean it kills and it separates? It kills in the sense that it makes the person external. To be external, to be a person who is living on the outside of himself, means that there is no consciousness of God. To gain consciousness of God, you have to have an inner life. You have to have a psychologically vibrant and energized life inside of you. That's why many people discover God specifically when they go through difficult times and they have to deal with themselves, with their inner aspect. And they have to deal with the harshness, the difficulties, the challenges, and so on. And then they discover that there is something inside much more than just crude matter. And they begin to discover the spirit, they begin to discover the soul. That is the Baal Shem Tov's task. The Baal Shem Tov is the first I. It is I. What does it mean it is I? It is I who kill or put to death, and it is I who bring back to life. Putting to death means that the person only has an external aspect to himself, and through the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, a person becomes much more sensitive to the inner aspect of themselves. And that means coming back to life. Specifically, coming back to life means, surprisingly enough, to have a rectified sense of self. In other words, the fact that so many people today are searching for themselves is actually a very good thing. Even though in the beginning, it could be that search for themselves severs them from God because they look more at themselves. But ultimately, this is a positive thing, because in the same way that we can't know about gravitational waves in the cosmos directly, we can only know about them indirectly. So the presence of God is only known at this stage of creation indirectly. It's not known directly. Sometimes people see what they think is an open miracle, and that'll be for them a sign that there is something external also. But most of the time we're dealing with the inner experience of what it means to have a relationship with God, and for that you need to have a self that is rectified. You have to have a self. The second experience is one of separation. Separation means, and this is actually more difficult than the sense of having of either having or not having a self. To be separated means to feel that I am not part of something greater. Rather, I stand by myself. And this is the most difficult experience that I think everybody suffers from today. Machatzti. In other words, God says, I have put up barriers. The body, the physical existence that we all share, actually separates us because we have no connection physically. And because we have no connection physically, I have my bank account, you have your bank account, I have my house, you have yours, I have my clothing, you have yours, I have my food, you have yours, and so on and so forth. The overriding feeling in reality is one of separation from one another. But because God is all of reality, and much more than that, but at least all of reality, then we have a distorted picture of what it means to be in touch with God. We have a picture that is centered only on our own experience. So the Alter Rebbe, who was also born on the 18th of Elul, he is towards the second pair of concepts here. I separated and I will connect. That it is God who set up the physical world, but he promises that there's also a way to connect. How do we connect? The way we connect is, of course, we do favors for one another. And this is the ultimate goal today of Chabad, you would say. That Chabad today, what the Rebbe did with Chabad, is he said, the ultimate goal that I want to reach is to have connection between people. I want to create a sense of community. And again, it's the same way as it is with the self. At first it looks like the discovery of the self leads to self-aggrandizement. It leads to self-worship. But eventually that discovery of the self is rectified and it allows a person to have an inner language, an inner experience that connects them to God. Likewise, the fact that we're going through a phase in history where it seems to us that everybody is splintered, reality is fragmenting in terms of the connection between people, it works the same way. In the beginning, it looks to you like everything is just separating and falling further apart. But it is exactly that distance that is needed to create connections. In other words, in the past, people were sort of stuck together. They didn't have a choice. Families had to live together. They lived in clans. They lived in a way that they had no choice but to live together one on top of the other. But today we have a choice. When you have a choice, the meaning of connection becomes much deeper. And the type of communities that are elective communities that you can build are far stronger in the end, and a much better experience of what it means that God is multifaceted, that you have to have many different opposites coming together in order to create the wholeness that is God, the way that it's reflected in your community, than it was in the past where you were sort of stuck together. There was no other option. So these two trends in human development, the development of the self and the development of the individual, are really one of the explanations of what this verse is talking about, with the Baal Shem Tov's teachings coming and rectifying the sense of self, and the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad's teachings, ultimately coming to rectify the sense of individuality that is severed from other individuals and creating community. So this is one of the most beautiful, I think, verses in the entire song. And there's many other explanations for these I, 4 times I, many other ways of looking at it. But I think that this interpretation is probably the most pertinent for our times. Thanks for joining, and tomorrow at the same time, regular time.